Hi, everybody. Good day. I'm pleased to inform that, as you see, uh, former American diplomat Jon Danilowicz has kindly agreed to answer some of my questions and queries, which I believe many Bangladeshis and Americans will benefit from his expertise and knowledge and close association with Bangladesh. Actually, he has been associated with Bangladesh as a US diplomat dealing with Bangladeshi affairs for more than 10 years. He was in Dhaka on three times, so in the 1990s and in the 2010s. So I will ask him some questions that would clarify a lot of things which we wanted to know. And I think I begin with a question that possibly would be a beginning to understand what's going on in Bangladesh. And so my question would be in the light of your long experience during and after your diplomatic career in Bangladesh and on Bangladesh, what do you think of Bangladesh politics today in the wake of Hasina's removal and especially what's going on in the recent past? So you can give your thoughts on something on Hasina regimes and how is it different from the present one, and is Dr. Yunus tackling the situation quite aptly, and what do you think about it?
Sure. Thanks, Taj. And first, thank you so much for the invitation. As you know, I'm pretty active on social media, particularly X. It's a great platform, but the problem is you have to explain your thoughts in, you know, 240 characters or a very short amount.
Yeah,
So on complicated issues, the nuance is often lost. So a format like yours where we can have a conversation, I think is so much more beneficial.
thank you.
Um, as you mentioned, I was involved with Bangladesh for almost my entire foreign service career, over 30 years.
Wow.
And until I retired in 2021, I was obviously constrained by what the US policy was of the day, that I was working on behalf of Republican and Democratic administrations, and I was trying to help inform that policy, but then also implement it. Since
Mm,
I retired in 2021, though, as a private citizen and as a representative of a nonprofit human rights group, I can say what I think, and I've enjoyed that freedom. And I got involved with an organization called Right to Freedom, in part because
mm,
I value freedom of speech more than anything.
right.
My involvement with Bangladesh in this new phase of my life, though, showed me how much the freedoms that I enjoyed were being constrained in Bangladesh. So many of my Bangladeshi friends were unable to speak freely. Some had been forced to leave the country. And we had seen a steady decline in the quality of democracy. As others have written about, who are far more eloquent and knowledgeable than I, Bangladesh was involved in this descent towards autocracy. So by the end of the Hasina period, I describe it as a brutal kleptocratic dictatorship.
Wow.
Um, Sheikh Hasina declared war on her own people in the summer of July and August 2024. The revolution succeeded. She was forced from office. But even had she somehow been able to succeed in once again tamping down protests, I'm convinced that her regime would have collapsed sooner or later, whether because of its economic mismanagement or because at some point or another the Bangladeshi people would have risen up. So I rejoiced along with my Bangladeshi friends when she left Bangladesh in August of 2024, and I had great hopes. I'll be the first to admit not all of those hopes have been realized. I said at the time, and I've said since, that I've seen other opportunities for the people of Bangladesh. I saw it in 1991 after the fall of Ershad. I saw it during the 2007-8 period when, again, it looked like there was an opportunity for a reset. I wasn't alive in 1971, but I've certainly read and heard a lot about that period. So for me, this was the fourth opportunity in Bangladesh in its short history to actually put the country on the road to sustainable democracy. The last year and a half have not been easy. Not everything has gone well. Not all of the hopes of the people in the summer of 2024 have been fulfilled. But this phase is coming to an end. And within the next 2 months, we'll have elections. The people of Bangladesh will finally have a chance to elect their representatives. And my hope is that whichever party comes to power after that election will take heed of what has happened in the past and will take heed of the aspirations of this younger generation and will finally build the Bangladesh that so many have sacrificed for over the decades.
Interesting. And there's a convergence between your and my thoughts on the previous regime, Hasina regime. You said kleptocratic dictatorial regime, aptly said, and that actually brushes aside some of the allegations the rumor mongers and conspiracy theorists in Bangladesh say about you. They're all, Jon Danilowicz has got bias against BNP. I think you have no reasons to be biased towards any party or personality in Bangladesh. Good to know that. And then, but you think that elections are in the offing and possibly they will be held in mid-February. I'm not that optimistic, but again, let's hope against hope that elections will be held. But the tendencies are there that some people or some groups and some organizations, some entities are trying hard to just make the election a distant possibility, or possibly they would try to do away with any electoral system in Bangladesh. Possibly they will be happy with, some people will be happy with a military dictatorial regime in Bangladesh, which happened again and again. So what do you think? Do you think free and fair elections could be held in Bangladesh? Because my question is a bit loaded, because you know that unlike America, unless a people is super rich, someone is super rich, he or she can't afford to take part in elections as a candidate. It requires about 100 million taka, at least, to take part as a candidate in the elections. So if they invest that, or if we take it as an investment, don't you think once elected, the parliament members, when they become ministers or remain members, they will try their best to recover that money and make some extra tenfold more than what they have invested in the elections.
Right.
So, will it
cost? There's so much to unpack there. And, I'm happy to come back to some of these fallacious reports about my views about the BNP later. But let me focus on your question. Yeah. So I had the opportunity to observe multiple elections in Bangladesh, beginning in 1991 with that election. I've observed elections at the Upazila level, at the local level, at the national level. In 1991, I went to Rangpur, and I was surprised to see former President Ershad's party and Ershad himself win, I think, 5 seats in Rangpur, even though he was in prison at the time. I mean, it showed me how Bangladeshi politics work at the grassroots level. The 91 elections were probably the freest and the fairest elections that I had seen in Bangladesh's history. But I have to say that, the 2008 elections, while there were certainly many issues in the pre-election period, and there were certainly some irregularities, our view at the time, and my view, was that the election results broadly represented the views and the wishes of the Bangladeshi people. Right. And, all of the parties had to take some responsibility for what happened. Subsequent elections, certainly, the subsequent elections in the Awami League period didn't meet even that low standard. But to get to your question particularly, that has been my concern as well. My concern has been that there are those who want to do business as usual. Now, I agree with your earlier point as well, that there are extreme elements, frankly, on both sides that want to frustrate elections. The representatives of the former prime minister have openly said that they will use violence and do whatever it takes to ensure the elections aren't held. And there may be others on an extreme level who want to frustrate elections. But I think there's a broad consensus, both domestically and internationally, that the way out of this current period is through elections. And for what it's worth, I personally don't think Professor Yunus wants to stay on a minute longer than he has to. Whether or not he was a reluctant draftee in August of 2024, we can debate that. But my sense is pretty clear now that he would like nothing more than to get back to his previous life, running the Grameen and the Yunus Center and Grameen Foundation and doing that kind of work. But you're right. And I think the people of Bangladesh are going to make their decisions on elections, not just on party platforms, but on the personalities, on the candidates that are chosen. There have been some newcomers, some younger faces that have been nominated, but there are some old guard who are used to doing things the old way. One of the things that I've been so touched by with the reaction to Osman Hadi's martyrdom has been people's reflections on him and his life and his example. And I deliberately chose the photo behind me of his janaza yesterday and the parliament, because one of the most touching things I read was people saying that Osman Hadi wanted to be the representative of Dhaka 8 constituency in this coming parliament. But through his life and his death, he now is forever a member of Bangladesh's parliament, that he came to parliament, maybe not in the way that he or others had hoped, but as the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are showing, they believe that Osman Hadi is in parliament and will be forever. And I hope that spirit motivates people, and that different kinds of candidates who aren't doing this for the traditional reasons of their own self-enrichment. I hope some candidates who are motivated by a true desire to do what's best for the nation come forward, and that the people reward those who want to do things in a different way.
Exactly. But I've got a question. I believe that countries like Bangladesh can't afford to have a British parliamentary system. And especially the way parliament elections are held, only very rich people can take part as candidates, participate as candidates. And then once elected, they get so much of power and privileges. They are entrusted with local development projects. That's the main reason why people are drawn to politics in Bangladesh, and people from the hoi polloi, I mean, without any credentials, without any qualifications, some having even not even having a high school diploma, get elected. They are totally incompetent, but they get elected, and some of them, many of them become ministers. So I believe that a country like Bangladesh needs a presidential system of government like the United States, where the parliament members or the congressmen or whatever we call them, they will have minimum power and privileges, and they won't be entrusted with development of local projects, and they won't be given a lump sum money which is not accountable. They will spend on development projects quite the amount. So once we can do away with that system, we only elect them to make law, but the government will be run by the president and his advisors or secretaries, as in we know in America. They select very competent people. That was the system during Ziaur Rahman's time. That's why Ziaur Rahman's cabinet was called the cabinet of talents. But contrary to that, when you look at the cabinet of Khaleda Zia's and Sheikh Hasina's, we find up to number of members of the cabinet are totally incompetent and extremely corrupt. So corruption in a country like Bangladesh, one of the poor countries in the world, is still a third world country. That poses the biggest threat to good governance. So elections, whether free or fair, or unfree or unfair, but point is that once they get all these privileges. So do you think we, Bangladesh, need to reform its electoral system or the system of government? But it is too late to say that. But for future, maybe viewers can think about it, that next time elections are held, it will be held as under a presidential system. So main elections will be the election of the president, not parliament members.
Right. No, absolutely. And you know, again, looking back to the summer of 2024, I was among those who thought that it was important that there be some necessary, long overdue reforms before the elections took place. We can debate whether or not the interim government went about the reform process the right way. We obviously have to hope that the next government and future governments will continue a reform process, because as you rightly point out, there are some systemic issues in Bangladesh. One is the one that you mentioned. For me, a basic problem or challenge in Bangladesh's politics is these patron-client relationships that contribute to what you say. It's almost, I've said in other systems that if you want to understand Bangladeshi politics, you should watch the movie The Godfather, or the
Yeah.
television show The Sopranos, because in some ways, some political elements act more like members of mafia organizations than they do like politicians.
Right.
The other issue I would mention briefly is the issue of over centralization. As
Yeah.
an American, I believe in the power of federalism, that even with a presidential system, as President Trump is finding out, he doesn't have all the power as president because the states and the cities have authorities. They can raise resources. They make decisions. In Bangladesh over the years, everything has become so centralized. I know that one of, again, Ziaur Rahman's innovations had been to build local government. In fact, one of the first issues that I worked on in Bangladesh in the early 90s was how to strengthen local government, because the 1991 Bangladesh government wanted to empower local government, again, following Ziaur Rahman's example, but those efforts never bore fruit.
Yes, very much so. So now, United States of America is very much involved in the Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific area, and they're concerned about the rise of China. And then what do you think American policy in relation to Bangladesh? Does it want Indian presence in Bangladesh or Chinese presence? And the way China is doing things in Bangladesh, investing billions and supervising development projects. So for America, don't you think China poses an impending threat to American interests in different ways? Lots of people are talking about, will they fight a full-fledged war, America and China? That sort of questions are raised by many theoreticians. But India and America, now we see that they are not in the best of terms. So what do you think, giving the choice, which side America will go, China or India, or they will remain neutral because they know that India has become a dirty word, four-letter word for average Bangladeshis. They don't want that America should be a friend of India. What do you think? It's a difficult tightrope walking for America, choosing between India and China, or they can do without choosing any side and do business in Bangladesh?
Yeah. So from a geopolitical standpoint, this is one of the most interesting developments during the Trump administration, because everyone had assumed at the beginning of the administration that Trump would take a very hard line on China. And certainly he has when it comes to trade. But on the geostrategic competition, I think Trump has been much more nuanced than many people had thought. I was recently in Pakistan, and this issue was very much front and center as the U.S. and Pakistan relationship has been improving, yet Pakistan and China have a long-standing, deep relationship, and people were concerned about the frictions. So I think in some ways, similar issues will apply in Bangladesh. And the best explanation I heard from one scholar in Pakistan is that the U.S. and China can pursue parallel tracks. They don't have to clash. They don't have to cooperate. They can work in parallel. And I think the opportunity in Bangladesh, as it is in Pakistan, is to look at the end goals. There are certain things which I'm sure the United States and China would agree on in terms of what they would like to see develop in Bangladesh in the future, whether it be about economic development, stability, sovereignty, etc. And there may be opportunities for the US and China to work in parallel. So I think the bottom line is that the US and China will remain competitors. There are certainly friction points, flashpoints in the South China Sea, in East Asia, where US and China may end up confronting each other militarily. We all hope that doesn't happen. But I think in terms of more broadly, I think the way that the US and China are interacting in South Asia now is very different than the trajectory we were on in the last administration, and very different than people had expected. And that partially explains why India and US relations in the Trump administration haven't developed in the way that most people, including most people in New Delhi, had assumed that they would.
But there's a perception that India is a member of the Quad, which China and many other people think that it is a quasi-military alliance. It has potentials to become another NATO in a limited sense of the expression. That might have annoyed China. So US is engaging India as a member of the Quad. Then the Trump administration is imposing so many restrictions, and then India is buying Russian gas, and that has created a big problem for the relationship between India and US. And US is imposing visa sanctions on Indians working in America. Visa restrictions have been imposed. So on the one hand, we see India being a Quad member is a close ally of Washington. On the other, we find Washington is annoyed with India's hobnobbing with Russia and doing not the right thing. So and then China is also possibly a potential threat. So how do you do the equation? How do you resolve the issue between keeping both China and India in good humor and do your politics in the region?
Right. Well, as a scholar and a practitioner, as well as anyone that an alliance is a very specific thing and has very specific obligations. NATO is an alliance for the United States. We have a solemn commitment to have American young people go and fight and die in defense of our alliance members.
Right.
The relationship between India and the United States was never such an alliance, and frankly, never would be, in large part because India has made it clear that it does not want an alliance with the United States. India has also shown that it values what it calls its strategic autonomy. So on issues related to Russia or the Ukraine or many other issues, India will pursue its independent policy. The Trump administration, in a policy of America First, has also made it clear that it will first pursue U.S. interests. And this has created tensions even in some of our traditional allies. So again, I think there has been a rethinking in Washington and an understanding that even those who at one point thought that if we were leading to a possible military confrontation with China, we needed countries like India on side as part of a broad strategic alliance, are recognizing that that promise never would have been fulfilled. So now people look at the U.S. relationship with India in very different ways. I mean, India is an important member of the international system. They're important economic and other areas in which the U.S. and India have to cooperate and have a relationship, and those issues are being worked. But I think the idea that the U.S. interests in vis-a-vis China are going to lead the U.S. to then defer to India on other issues in which the U.S. has interest, I think those days are gone. So while in the past the U.S. or previous U.S. administrations may have been overly deferential to New Delhi when it comes to policies in South Asia, for example, I think these days the U.S. is fortunately looking at its relationships with other countries on their own merits. And this has certainly been the case with the United States relationship with Pakistan. Exactly. No longer are the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, the opportunities there constrained by, what that means for the U.S. relationship with India. And I think the same will hold true for Bangladesh and for other countries as well.
I've got two questions. Number one is, then what do you think about the Quad? It's just an informal alliance having no military importance, significance? Is it just like a sort of a cooperation, collaboration, friendship, and having no military dimension of the program? That's the question number one. And number two is the most, okay, you answered this question first, because the second question is much more loaded and broader. So what do you think about Quad? Is it just informal alliance, or it has some military dimension?
Yeah. So, I'm sure you and I have groups of friends. So there might be, 4 or 5 of us who are a group of friends. But within that group, you have a best friend, and then another friend may be there because they were introduced by another one. So if you take that to international relations, the closest U.S. relationship is with Japan, without doubt, from an economic, security, and other standpoint. The United States and Japan relationship alliance is the core. And the United States and Australia's relationship alliance is also very strong, including because U.S. and Australian soldiers have, again, shed blood together, whether it was in Iraq, Afghanistan, in the Second World War, etc. India is a newcomer to this. So my sense of the way to look at the Quad is that there was already a security architecture in the Asian Pacific region. And the U.S. and others, in recognition of India's, rising importance, thought it was worthwhile inviting India to join the club. And India has joined the club. But perhaps there was then an understanding that India's understanding of what that relationship meant was different than the other members. So it's not as if we've stopped being friends. It's not as if we'll stop meeting, we'll stop looking for opportunities to cooperate. But again, I think those who thought that the Quad was going to transform itself into some type of alliance, I think they realize now that that was never a realistic prospect. And again, partially because India has not wanted that. If India had approached the Quad saying, we want, ironclad security guarantees, we want to have mutual defense agreements, we want to closely integrate in terms of, planning for strategic issues, I'm sure the US, Australia, and Japan would have considered the costs and benefits of that. But it was clear that that was never something India intended. So again, I think it's more of a loose, informal arrangement whereby, the members of the Quad will, consult regularly, will look for areas for cooperation. But I don't see it going beyond that.
Thank you. I'm just a slight point of disagreement with you that
Sure.
America and Australia, they had common background. They fought the world wars together. India was actually the biggest provider of troops in the First and Second World Wars. And the decisive battles would have been lost had there not been millions of Indian soldiers fighting for the British Empire.
Sure.
That changed the fate of Burma and that the fate of a lot of other places in Europe. And now the question is, China and India are not the same thing for the United States. India is a potential ally. It's a democracy, despite its faulty system of governance, one-party rule, etc. But China is not a democracy. And China has problems in the Malacca Strait. China wants another route to do trade, world trade. It needs a port in the Bay of Bengal. In that regard, China requires Myanmar and Bangladesh. So I think Bangladesh has emerged as the most important country, to paraphrase Napoleon, which he said about Egypt in the 19th century, the most important country. I paraphrase that vis-a-vis Bangladesh. It is the most important country for both China and India. And America just can't sit idle without taking sides, because America wants to contain China not only in the Asia-Pacific region, not only across Taiwan and elsewhere, but America is worried about Chinese ambitions in Myanmar and Bangladesh. That's where the Burma Act was enacted, and it was sort of giving a license to the Americans to manipulate or penetrate into Myanmar and liberate Arakan, and then with the help of Bangladesh, they will contain China. But that project has failed, backfired. China, meanwhile, has brought several divisions of troops, its People's Army, into Myanmar, and we don't hear anymore that Myanmar army is getting beaten by rebels or Arakan army. Arakan army has become a non-entity now. China will do anything to keep at least two countries under its thumb. One is Pakistan, another is Myanmar, for its own survival. Because Pakistan is needed, because Gwadar port and Xinjiang, that link, road link, is very vital for China to get Middle Eastern oil supply directly taken to China. But China wants a port somewhere in the Bay of Bengal, and they need both Myanmar and Bangladesh. And that is a big security threat for India as well as America. If America wants to contain China, if the Strait of Malacca remains the most vulnerable choke point for China, and China getting another route through Myanmar, so both America and India have got some divergent interests there. Both of them want to contain China. But what is possible in Bangladesh, it's not possible that America can contain either Pakistan or China. That's why America is now befriending Pakistan, and especially its power base, the military. But that is not likely to happen in Bangladesh. So China, I don't think China will give up. So do you foresee any possible war or conflict becoming more intense and India coming into the US orbit as they will have a common interest against China.
Yeah. So again, this gets us into further afield. What I would say though is in terms of the U.S. security relationship with Bangladesh, one of the most encouraging things to me over the last year and a half has been the continuity in the U.S. Bangladesh security relationship. There was just a meeting of the defense consultative group between the U.S. and Bangladesh that took place in Dhaka. Exercises, bilateral visits have continued. So the U.S. continues to see Bangladesh as an important security partner in the Indo-Pacific region. And even as China continues to be an important supplier of military hardware and has important relationships, I think the U.S. is investing in that as well. Again, I don't want to necessarily get into hypotheticals, but even in a situation that one could foresee of a military conflict between the U.S. and China, the most likely flashpoint are the Taiwan Straits. So you could see a potential U.S.-China military conflict in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. But then what would the nature of that conflict be? I don't anticipate a conflict in which there would be introduction of large numbers of ground forces. The U.S. isn't going to fight another land war in Asia. So what does India bring to the table? India brings to the table a large land force, a land army. But because of geography, it's not as if the Indians are going to enter into China and open a second front. So the type of conflict that the U.S. and China would fight, I don't think is one in which India would play a critical role. And I think in some ways, what's contributed to the change in the U.S.-India relationship and the change in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship was an analysis of this short conflict between India and Pakistan earlier this year, which displayed some of the weaknesses of the Indian military establishment, even as they have numbers in certain areas on a qualitative level. Both Indian equipment and Indian performance, the personnel, have shown serious deficiencies. So this, I think, has also potentially led some in Washington to have second thoughts about the military value of India in terms of a conflict with China. But again, that's a whole other discussion, and it gets easily out of my area of expertise.
Right. Now, I've got a question about Pakistan. What do you think about Donald Trump trying to appease Pakistan army, inviting Pakistan army for coffee in White House and then hobnobbing with General Asim Munir? He's the man who runs Pakistan. But despite doing this sort of an approachment between Washington and Islamabad, rather in the military headquarters, Pakistan government, whichever party comes to power in Pakistan, for its own survival, they need the Chinese umbrella. And so despite all this trying, this is my personal feeling that Washington won't be able to distance Pakistan from China. Pakistan is not going to become another Philippines, let alone Japan or Australia for America. So why do you think America is so much keen on nurturing Pakistan army? Do they think that if Imran Khan is removed forever, then some sort of government which will come to Islamabad and they will be very friendly, over-friendly to America? I think that dream will be shattered. That won't ever happen. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So again, I think a couple of things. So first, I think the Trump administration and President Trump himself have taken a very realistic approach to Pakistan. They know where the power lies, and it lies with the field marshal and the army, not with the elected government. So in some ways, the Trump administration is just responding to a reality. I think, in the Trump administration's view of the world, Pakistan has an important contribution to make. One area that often isn't discussed in South Asian circles is Pakistan's role in it becoming a net security provider in the Middle East. The Pakistan-Saudi Arabia military pact, Pakistan's likely contribution to a peacekeeping force in Gaza, Pakistan's potential role in other conflicts in the Middle East. I think that's something that the Trump administration has looked at and has seen that Pakistan has something to add. In terms of balancing America and China, I mean, the Pakistanis have a lot of experience in this, and Pakistan wants to have a close relationship with both China and the United States. And what's interesting is, from a Chinese perspective, again, I'm not a China expert, but if you look at the rising tension between India and Pakistan that led to the conflict earlier this year, from a Chinese perspective, having the United States take a more supportive role of Pakistan and trying to avoid a deterioration in the security situation and helping in a way to protect Pakistan's interests actually serves China's interests as well. So I'm sure there are areas in which the US and Chinese interests will potentially clash in Pakistan. But there are also areas where, again, at least the goals are converging. So, and the final one I'll mention is the Pakistan economy. Pakistan has serious economic challenges. It's not in America's interest and it's not in China's interest to see an economic collapse in Pakistan. So from a Chinese perspective, more US investment in Pakistan, US support for Pakistan and the World Bank and the IMF, and US business interest in Pakistan doesn't necessarily have to conflict with China. In fact, it can help serve China's interests by stabilizing Pakistan's economy. So US and China are rivals. They clash in certain areas. But when it comes to Pakistan, there's an interesting convergence underway.
Wonderful. Actually, that's my thought. You echo my thought. Because Pakistan is another important country for the US. And as you told that Americans are not that very optimistic and they're not going gaga about India's defense potential, military potential. So they need to appease Pakistan rather than going with India, which is unpredictable. India is not leaving Russia on its own. India is collaborating with Russia, buying Russian goods and Russian gas. So that's a big headache for America. So that's a very important, interesting point, which observers should be interested in, that both China and America want Pakistan to remain viable economically, politically, and militarily, and it's a nuclear power. Unlike Bangladesh, Pakistan is much more important. It's a world player. Bangladesh is a player in South Asia, and also in a subservient way. It's a minor player. Pakistan, by its own right, is a major player across the region and in Central Asia and then Middle East, bordering those regions as well. Pakistan is very important for America. That's important. That's a very interesting point. So I've got a question about, or before I go to raise another question, I have a friend from South Africa, Tuhin Islam. He's an activist and a human rights activist. He fights for democracy in Bangladesh, a good friend of mine. So I would ask Tuhin Islam to raise his questions, short 1 or 2 questions, and then Jon has agreed to answer those. So Tuhin Islam, go ahead and ask your questions.
Thank you, sir. It is my privilege to join a brilliant personality like you, Professor Taj Hashmi and Jon Danilowicz. Jon Danilowicz, I have spoke to him yesterday in a X space. I did ask a question and he answered that. I got 2 questions, one for Professor Taj Hashmi, for you, and one for Jon. First, I'm going to ask a question to Jon. In Bangladesh, do you think the parliamentary government system will be right way to continue, or Bangladesh to have a better, better than the parliament government system to the American way, like a presidential government system? I believe Professor Taj Hashmi will be agree with me. I also like to have a Bangladesh presidential government. So the reason I want it to be that way, because it will ease the political chaos in my country. So I just want to ask you, what do you suggest?
Sure. So there's, I think there's 2 aspects to this. So the first issue is whether in the long term the parliamentary system is best. And I think those discussions should take place, and there's certainly plenty of scope for reform. But those changes will take time. And my thought and my hope will be that in the short term, even if Bangladesh continues to have the parliamentary system, there are ways that that parliament can work better. So one of the reasons why some of the criticisms of the parliamentary system exist isn't because of the parliamentary system itself. I mean, the parliamentary system works well in other countries. So I think what we have to ask is why it doesn't work in Bangladesh. And, there have been some discussions and some promises by Bangladesh's political parties that they have studied this issue and that they're willing to work on things. So, for example, making parliament committees more functional, giving more of a role to the opposition. But the proof is in the pudding, right? That let's see what happens. And, the other important part will be that the citizens of Bangladesh need to ensure that their voices are heard, not just periodically in elections, but in between as well. So there are many in Bangladesh who want to see further reforms. There are civil society groups. There's a Voices for Reform group. I hope these groups continue to advocate even after the elections, because the elections are only a step in the process. They're not the end of the line.
I've got an observation. As the saying goes, great people think alike and fools.
Thank you. My second, okay.
Fools seldom differ. Twin Islam, before he joined, I raised this question and we discussed it. And I'm a blind advocate of presidential system because I think under Ziaur Rahman's time, the key to development was the system, presidential system. Okay, Twin, what's your question to me? Ask me.
No, and now thank you, John, for your answer. My last question is for Professor Taj Hashmi sir. That recently in Bangladesh, I have seen there is a media personnel is intervene, and his involvement in political issue is Amar Desh owner. Mahmoud Rahman. Recently, he called all-party alliance or in a program that BNP never attended in person, but they supported. So I have seen a video that you have made and your calculation, your observation, and it was correct. So my question is that why Mahmoud Rahman, in every political aspect, he is a journalist, he is an editor of his own newspaper, why he personally intervene in political exercise? That is my question to us, because he is your friend. Thank you.
I can't answer on his behalf. Why is he interested and indulging in politics? He's a good friend of mine because I've been very sympathetic to him, and he's a very close friend of mine. And I always admired his wit and knowledge and integrity. He's a patriotic person, and most importantly, he's not a corrupt person. He didn't make money, so as far as I believe. But I don't know. I think that's the way he is doing things. I think he's not doing the right thing at the moment. This is my opinion. If Mahmoud Rahman, if you are watching this show, I politely disagree with your methods of doing things because you are inviting all parties conference. You would be chairing that conference. Why on earth BNP should go and attend that conference when there are elements from Jamaat-e-Islami which were holding BNP responsible for Hadi's attacks on Hadi, which he succumbed to. He died. So they were blaming BNP. And why should BNP go there? And we have observed from the so-called all-party meeting under the chairmanship of Mahmoud Rahman that actually some elements from the NCP and some other very rowdy elements, they created controversies between Bangladesh and India. One Abul Hassan Abdullah, he said, if India doesn't behave, we would get that 7 sisters away. We'll take them away. That sort of, I mean, it's like a humbug, and it's like someone totally unaware and literate about global politics can raise that sort of questions. And then Mahmoud Rahman was actually nurturing those elements, very rowdy and uncouth and uneducated. I'm sorry for my expressions. So I think BNP did the right thing by not attending that conference. And why on earth Dr. Mahmudur Rahman is urging people in a very not so pleasant way, and not so unbiased way. People interpret his commands that as if he has asked people to attack Pratham Alo and Delhi Star office. So whatever is in his mind, he knows. But the implications of his very emotional appeal to the Bangladeshis to do things, take things in their hand, I think that's not the right thing Mahmudur Rahman should be doing at the moment. That's my personal feeling. But I don't doubt his patriotism and integrity. He is avowedly anti-Indian like me, because anti-Indian in the sense that the Indian Modi government or whatever government we have seen since 1947, India per se is not our enemy, but the governments that came in India, most of them were anti-Bangladesh, anti-Pakistan, anti-Muslim. So in that regard, I've got a mixed feeling about Mahmudur Rahman. Now, I hope that I've answered your question. So I've got a last two questions. Just as you see the picture, you are sitting along with Ilyas Hussain and Jamaat Chief Shafiqur Rahman in New York. That has created some misgiving. People think, oh, you are harboring Jamaat leaders and you are friendly with them. What does it signal? Then we see another picture of yours with Dr. Yunus. So would you explain the two pictures of yours with these people?
Sure. No, thanks for that question, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to clarify things. Look, I'm a retired U.S. diplomat. I was fortunate to reach the senior levels of the State Department, and I worked for over 30 years. As you know, the U.S. government provides a generous pension after retirement, which I've received. So this means that I can work on Bangladesh and do my advocacy without worrying about where my next meal is coming from. So I've not received a penny from any Bangladeshi political party, any Bangladeshi entity, any Bangladeshi government. I don't work for anyone except myself, and I say what I believe. Over the course of 3 decades, I've taken thousands of photographs with thousands of people in Bangladesh, from prime ministers and presidents to rickshaw pullers. Yes, the picture that you showed is a picture that I took. Again, if somebody asks me to take a picture, I say yes. If I wanted to hide my association with somebody, I would decline to take a photo. So the fact that the photo was taken and the fact that somebody else made it public is something that I'm not ashamed of. In terms of the implications, though, I think this is what's important. And some people maliciously, including some, frankly, aligned with the BNP, have spread this photo. And what's interesting to me is that you have a confluence of some individuals associated with the BNP, some associated with the Awami League, and some Indians who are all basically saying the same talking points about me, that somehow I'm part of a Jamaat-led conspiracy involving destabilizing Bangladesh. It's very simple that I had met with Dr. Shafiq when I had visited Bangladesh. I've met with previous emirs of Jamaat Islami, just as I've met with secretary generals of other political parties. He was coming to the United States, and I thought it was my responsibility, my obligation, when I meet with somebody in their country, when they come to my country and want to meet, if I'm available, I'm happy to do so. Right. So I went to a location in New York where the meeting was to take place. Dr. Shafiq had a full schedule, as you would expect. So, as is often the case, he's finishing one meeting and then he's beginning another meeting. So he had a meeting with Ilyas Hussain. You can ask them what they talked about. I have no idea. Somebody in the room, I'm not even sure who it was, suggested we take a photo. The 4 of us who fit on the couch sat on the couch. Someone took a photograph. Ilyas left. He went on to do the rest of his business. Dr. Shafiq and I and some of his advisors who had come with him from Bangladesh had a very pleasant conversation about the same things I always discuss, trying to understand what's happening in Bangladesh, trying to explain the United States perspective, and sharing my goal of a better Bangladeshi future. I said farewell to Dr. Shafiq. He had a full program in 4 cities in the United States. I didn't participate in any of those other public or private programs, and he went a separate way. So anyone who's spreading that photograph to give an impression that I'm part of some secret cabal involving Elias Hussein and the leadership of Jamaat Islami is just lying for their own purposes.
Thank you very much. I would have never thought of that, that John is conspiring along with Jamaat Islami, which I have been lambasting as an Islamofascist party for obvious reasons. But so nobody would believe if someone says that, oh, John is a partisan, John is involved in Jamaat Islami activities. So you have rightly explained it. I wanted the audience to know that what is the background of the picture. As at the very beginning, I said that Bangladeshis are very opinionated. They don't trust people, and they believe in conspiracy theories and rumors. Rumors actually run Bangladesh. So in that regard, I've got a last question to you. If you are asked to give your honest opinion, message to the Bangladesh political leadership before the next election, what would it be? What would you ask them to do?
Right. So, let me answer that, and then let me come back to the BNP, because I think that's important as well for your audience to know. So the first message I have is that I understand that elections are competitive, and that in the next 2 months, leaders of the NCP, the Jamaat Islami, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and other parties will compete. And elections are contentious. They are in the United States. They are everywhere. But let's not lose sight of the big picture. Regardless of the differences between those political parties in Bangladesh right now, they all share one thing in common. They all oppose what the previous government stood for and was trying to do. So what I'm hopeful for is that the elections will be hard fought. The elections will be free and fair, that the winners will act graciously, the losers will accept the results, and everyone will continue to work toward this goal of building a new Bangladesh. And ultimately, the people of Bangladesh will decide what direction to take the country in. That's my hope and my expectation. And then just to answer the BNP question, as I mentioned, these rumors about me are spread by some people on the fringes of BNP. I'm very grateful that none of the senior leadership of the BNP have attacked me. And I think there's a reason for that, because they know me well. I first served in Bangladesh in the 1990s, and I was there during that first BNP government. I never had the opportunity to meet Ziaur Rahman, and I never had the opportunity to meet Tariq Rahman. But I've spent a lot of time with Begum Khaleda Zia in group meetings, in private meetings. She has always been very gracious and friendly to me. If you look in the cabinet at my home, there's a tea set which Begum Zia presented to my wife when we were departing Bangladesh. And even my kids, when they were very little, would look at that tea set. And my daughters would play with it, and they said, "This is Begum Zia's tea set." So I have the greatest respect for her, for what she stands for, and all she's done. And I have many friends throughout the BNP. I bear no will towards the BNP. I'm not working to prevent a BNP government. If the BNP is elected, I hope that they will govern according to the promises and the pledges that they've put forward. Like I said, I've never met Tariq Rahman. Some people will spread copies of these WikiLeaks cables that were written during a time that I was in Bangladesh. As you know as well as I do, the only person whose views matter on a message from an embassy is the ambassador. It's the ambassador's name at the bottom of the cable. So whether I drafted it, whether I might have edited it, the views that went out were the views of the ambassador at the time, not the views of Jon Danilowicz. I speak as a private citizen now, but when I was in government, I spoke as a member of a diplomatic team. So anyone who takes an excerpt or a paragraph from a US government cable, whether it's in 2007 or in another period, and says, here's what John thinks, simply doesn't understand how diplomacy works.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. I've got just last one question. You can answer in 1 or 2 words, or you can use a couple of sentences. Do you apprehend or foresee that elections will be marred and the country will be heading towards a civil war?
I don't worry about a civil war unless somehow the Awami League is allowed to come back in, because they've only pledged vengeance and violence. So that's when I would worry about a civil war. In terms of the election itself, I'm hopeful, and my expectation is that the election will be peaceful. My only concern there is that the efforts to create this violence will deter some people from coming because they won't feel safe in voting. So I hope that the election environment is safe and festive as Professor Yunus has pledged.
Thank you very much, John, for coming. And as I expected, you were wonderful. You have said everything. You haven't antagonized anybody, and you have done a right job even after retiring as a diplomat. You have been diplomatic, but you have also told things candidly as a private citizen. Thank you very much, John, and hope to interact with you again. And I appreciate the viewers, and they should circulate this. They should share this interview, not because I am in it, but because Jon Danilowicz is here, so they can learn things from what John thinks about Bangladesh, and they can have a clear-cut idea about what the United States administration thinks about Bangladesh and the region across. Thank you very much, and thank you, John, for coming, and thank my audience for watching this show, and please share it, and then please try to understand what John has said, and I hope there will be Bengali subtitle of it, and others, those who are not fluent in English, would be able to understand it. Thank you, John, again. Thank you, everyone. Good day.